Winter 1978. Moscow. The Cold War has entered a dangerous new phase of technological escalation. In the closed design bureaus of the Soviet military-industrial complex, engineers are finalizing a new generation of terrifying weapons: the MiG-29 Fulcrum and the Su-27 Flanker. To Western analysts, these aircraft are nightmares, fast, agile, and rumored to possess a revolutionary look-down, shoot-down radar capability that could wipe the U.S. Air Force from the skies. The Pentagon is panic-stricken. They are spending billions of dollars trying to guess how these new systems work, terrified that American air power has finally been eclipsed. Satellites can photograph the planes on the runway, but they cannot see inside the electronics. They cannot read the mind of a chief designer. The United States is flying blind against a lethal new enemy. But they didn't know that the solution was already walking towards them. On a snowy Moscow street, a solitary, unassuming man was attempting to approach an American diplomatic car. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a politician. He was an engineer. And tucked inside his coat was the answer to a billion-dollar question. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. The man approaching that car carried a deep, simmering hatred for the regime he served, and he held the keys to its destruction in his briefcase. The intelligence he was about to offer would not just fill in the gaps, it would tear the entire Soviet air defense strategy apart. His name was Adolf Georgievich Tolkachev.
Born in 1927 in the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic, Tolkachev was, by the late 1970s, a highly respected senior electronics engineer working at the prestigious Scientific Research Institute of Radar, NIRR, in Moscow. This institute, known today as Fazatron, was the Soviet Union's premier design bureau specializing in military avionics. Fazatron was responsible for developing the sophisticated radar systems, weapons control interfaces, and electronic warfare suites for the nation's most advanced combat aircraft. The very systems the West desperately sought to understand, predict, and ultimately counter. Tolkachev, through decades of dedicated work and proven expertise, had ascended to the senior rank of chief designer. This position placed him not merely within the institute, but at the veritable epicenter of Soviet airborne radar research, development, and production. His role was not that of a minor functionary processing routine paperwork or a peripheral observer looking in from the outside. Tolkachev was directly involved in the design, testing, and oversight of the critical next-generation avionics systems the West feared most. His high-level security clearance, combined with his specific project responsibilities, granted him virtually unfettered access to the most sensitive technical documentation imaginable within his field. Detailed blueprints of radar antenna designs, intricate circuit diagrams of signal processors, classified performance specifications derived from flight testing, confidential testing results highlighting successes and failures, internal research and development reports outlining future technological paths, and crucially, long-range strategic development plans charting the intended evolution of Soviet avionics for years to come. He possessed a complete, systemic engineer's eye view of the very technology that the CIA, the U.S. Air Force, and NATO allies were collectively spending billions of dollars attempting to understand, predict, and ultimately counter. What motivated Adolf Tolkachev to volunteer for one of the most dangerous undertakings imaginable during the Cold War, espionage against his own country from within its military establishment, was not a desire for Western wealth or a glamorous lifestyle. His impetus stemmed from a profound, deeply personal, and implacable hatred for the Soviet system. His motivations were not mercenary, they were ideological, forged by the enduring trauma inflicted by Joseph Stalin's Great Terror decades earlier. Tolkachev's wife, Natalia, was a direct child of its victims. Her mother had been arrested and executed by the state security apparatus, and her father had been condemned to years of brutal forced labor in the Gulag system. This searing family history instilled in Tolkachev a quiet but burning resentment against the communist regime he outwardly served. He came to view the Soviet government as fundamentally oppressive, corrupt, and hypocritical, betraying the ideals it publicly espoused. He found inspiration not in party doctrine, but in the quiet courage of prominent Soviet dissidents like the Nobel Prize-winning author Alexander Solzhenitsyn and the physicist and human rights advocate Andrei Sakharov, whose principled stands against the regime resonated deeply with his own disillusionment. Korote later confided to his CIA handlers, explaining his motivations, that he considered himself a dissident at heart. This powerful ideological conviction, this deep-seated desire for revenge against the system that had brutalized his family and suppressed his nation, made Tolkachev an exceptionally rare and extraordinarily valuable type of intelligence asset. When he first initiated contact with the CIA, he explicitly refused any form of payment. He knew accepting money would immediately draw suspicion from the ever-watchful KGB, but more fundamentally, he felt his actions were a matter of profound principle, not commerce. Instead, his initial requests were touchingly personal, focused on providing his teenage son with items unavailable in the scarcity-ridden Soviet Union, tangible symbols of the Western cultural freedom he admired, high-quality art supplies, rock music albums by bands like Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and the Beatles, and books by Western authors, while he later pragmatically accepted large sums of money to be deposited by the CIA into an overseas account for his family's potential future, and requested substantial amounts of rubles to potentially bribe colleagues or guards if he suspected discovery. His core motivation remained remarkably consistent: a burning desire for revenge against the Soviet state. His primary goal, as he articulated it, was not personal enrichment, but to inflict the greatest possible strategic damage to the Soviet military and political system. This powerful, internal, self-sustaining motivation ensured a continuous, prolific, and exceptionally high-quality intelligence flow over several years, as the true reward Tolkachev sought was the direct, tangible strategic harm he knew his disclosures were causing to the regime he despised. Tolkachev's journey from disillusioned engineer to active CIA asset began in January 1977. Over the course of the next year, he embarked on a patient, methodical, and extraordinarily perilous quest to make contact with American intelligence officers in Moscow. Operating entirely on his own initiative, he made 5 separate attempts to approach cars bearing distinctive U.S. diplomatic license plates, usually near the American embassy or residential compounds, quickly leaving handwritten notes for their occupants, hoping one would reach the right hands. The CIA's Moscow station, however, operated under intense KGB surveillance and was conditioned by decades of sophisticated Soviet counterintelligence operations, including numerous attempts to entrap CIA officers using provocations or fake dangle sources pretending to offer secrets. Consequently, the station leadership was initially deeply suspicious of Tolkachev's unsolicited approaches. Fearing a complex KGB setup, they ignored his first 4 attempts, discarding the notes or filing them away as probable provocations. But Tolkachev, driven by his conviction, persisted. On his 5th attempt, in February 1978, he managed to pass a more substantial note, reportedly containing several pages of intriguing, verifiable technical data on aircraft electronics directly to a CIA case officer. This tangible sample finally convinced the newly arrived station chief, Gardner or Gus Hathaway, that the potential intelligence payoff warranted the considerable risk. Hathaway authorized taking the next step. The CIA assigned a skilled, fluent Russian-speaking case officer, John Gilsher, to establish the first clandestine face-to-face contact with the mysterious volunteer. Once this precarious channel was carefully opened and initial meetings successfully conducted, the CIA quickly, almost breathlessly, began to realize the sheer magnitude and unprecedented value of the asset who had fallen into their lap. Tolkachev's senior position as a chief designer at Positron, NIRR, gave him legitimate, routine access not just to isolated components, but to the complete ecosystem of Soviet air combat technology. He could provide, and was willing to provide, detailed schematics, performance data, and development roadmaps for the crucial radar systems not only of the next-generation lightweight fighter, MiG-29, and heavy air superiority fighter, Su-27, but also for the formidable, high-speed MiG-31 interceptor, the Foxbat's true successor. His access extended even further, encompassing the intricate guidance systems of a whole new generation of Soviet air-to-air missiles, including the medium-range R-23 AA-7 Apex, the improved R-24 AA-7 Apex, the highly anticipated R-27 AA-10 Alamo, designed for the MiG-29 and Su-27, and the potent long-range R-33 AA-9 Amos, specifically paired with the MiG-31's powerful radar. Adolf Tolkachev was, in short, arguably the single most knowledgeable source on the totality of Soviet avionics development the West could ever have possibly hoped to find, sitting directly at the nexus of its design, testing, and future evolution. The door to the adversary's most vital technological secrets had just been opened from the inside.
The information that began to flow from Adolf Tolkachev, designated by the CIA with the ominous codename CKS Sphere, was not merely intelligence in the conventional sense. It represented a complete technical dissection of the adversary's present and future air combat capabilities. Over the course of 21 clandestine, high-risk meetings conducted in Moscow between early 1979 and his capture in June 1985, Tolkachev handed over thousands upon thousands of top-secret documents, photographed meticulously with CIA-provided sub-miniature cameras and his own Pentax. This constituted a treasure trove of raw engineering data, blueprints, test results, design specifications that would fundamentally and irrevocably alter the strategic balance of air power for decades to come. At the absolute core of Tolkachev's phenomenal disclosures were the complete design documents for the Soviet Union's entire next generation of advanced fighter radars. This was not second-hand reporting, hearsay, or analytical inference. These were the actual blueprints, the detailed circuit diagrams, the internal research and development reports, the performance specifications, and the flight test results that allowed U.S. engineers at places like Hughes Aircraft, Westinghouse, and classified Air Force laboratories like the Wright-Patterson Foreign Technology Division to effectively build virtual and in some cases physical replicas of these critical Soviet systems for intensive study, analysis, and electronic exploitation. The Zaslon radar, Soviet designation SBI-16, NATO name Flashdance, destined for the powerful MiG-31 Foxhound interceptor, was arguably the crown jewel of Tolkachev's initial deliveries. He provided the plans for what was revealed to be the world's first passive electronically scanned array radar to be installed in a fighter jet. This was a revolutionary technology, previously seen in the West only on large platforms like the B-1 bomber prototypes and sophisticated ground-based air defense systems. A PESA radar utilizes thousands of individual phase-shifting elements
to steer its radar beam electronically, almost instantaneously, without any moving antenna parts. This allows it to scan vast volumes of airspace and track multiple targets simultaneously with a speed and flexibility impossible for traditional mechanically scanned radar antennas. Tolkachev's documents revealed the Zaslon's full architecture, including its large, powerful 1.1-meter diameter antenna, its impressive claimed ability to detect a bomber-sized target at ranges up to 200 kilometers, and its unprecedented capacity for the time to track up to 10 targets simultaneously while guiding long-range R-33 missiles against 4 of them concurrently. The complete compromise of this landmark, state-of-the-art system before it was even widely deployed operationally represented a catastrophic, almost unthinkable blow to the core of the Soviet Union's future air defense strategy, which relied heavily on the MiG-31 to counter low-flying U.S. bombers and cruise missiles. For the widely deployed MiG-23 Flogger and the highly anticipated new lightweight fighter, the MiG-29 Fulcrum, Tolkachev provided extensive, detailed data on the Sapphire family of radars, including the RP-23 Sapphire 23, the developmental N003, and the production N019 Sapphire 29. His intelligence exposed not only their intended capabilities, but more importantly, their critical weaknesses and limitations. The Sapphire 23D equipping the MiG-23, for example, was revealed to be a notoriously unreliable system that employed a relatively primitive envelope detection technique for its look-down mode, lacking a true, robust post-Doppler signal processor capable of effectively filtering ground clutter. Tolkachev's materials detailed its significant maintenance issues, with performance varying wildly between individual radar units, and identified specific blind velocities, relative target speeds at which an aircraft would become invisible to the radar due to fundamental flaws in its signal processing design. This granular technical information was pure gold for U.S. electronic warfare officers and engineers, providing them with a precise roadmap of exploitable vulnerabilities. The radar intended for the Soviet Union's premier new air superiority fighter, the Su-27 Flanker, designated the N001 Mech NATO slotback, was also thoroughly compromised by Tolkachev before it entered widespread service. His data shockingly revealed that the N001, far from being a completely new high-performance design matching the Su-27's superb aerodynamic capabilities, was essentially a scaled-up derivative design based heavily on the MiG-29's already known to be problematic N019 radar architecture. Critically, Tolkachev exposed its abysmal initial reliability problems, with internal Soviet test reports indicating a mean time between failures of a mere 5 hours in early production units, meaning the radar failed, on average, after only 5 hours of operation. This knowledge shattered the growing myth in the West of the Su-27 as an invincible, technologically superior marvel. It showed that even the most advanced Soviet airframe was initially hobbled by a fragile, underdeveloped, and fundamentally problematic avionics suite, giving the West crucial breathing room. Tolkachev's intelligence coup extended far beyond the radar hardware itself, delving deep into the complex software algorithms, processing logic, and integrated systems that made these radars function as part of a complete weapons system. He provided unique and invaluable data, including actual results from classified Soviet jam-proofing tests conducted against their own radars. This revealed the specific mathematical algorithms and electronic techniques they employed for electronic countermeasures, or ECCM, how their radars were designed to resist or filter out Western jamming signals.
This was the absolute key to unlocking their electronic defenses. Knowing precisely how a Soviet radar was programmed to identify and reject jamming allowed U.S. engineers at EW Labs to design new, adaptive ECM pods that would transmit the exact type of complex, deceptive noise or false target signals that the specific Soviet systems were not programmed to recognize or ignore. He also compromised their critical identification friend or foe, or IFS systems. Soviet IFS technology, the electronic means by which their aircraft and air defense systems distinguished friendly targets from hostile ones, was already suspected as a vulnerability since Viktor Belenko's MiG-29 defection had exposed the relative simplicity of the older SRO-2 NATO odd rods systems codes. Tolkachev's documents provided the detailed technical specifications and operational protocols for the newer parole or password system then being introduced. His materials confirmed its cryptographic weaknesses and provided the U.S. with the potential ability to spoof Soviet IFS interrogations, electronically deceiving Soviet radars and missile batteries into perceiving incoming U.S. aircraft as friendly, potentially delaying or preventing engagement. Finally, and crucially for understanding the complete combat capability, Tolkachev delivered detailed reports and manuals describing how the new generation of Soviet air-to-air missiles, such as the versatile medium-range R-27 Alamo and the potent long-range R-33 Amos, were integrated with these advanced radar and fire control systems. This included information on missile seeker head capabilities, guidance logic, launch parameters, and potential weaknesses. This allowed U.S. analysts to map out and understand the entire Soviet air-to-air kill chain, from initial target detection by the radar through tracking and identification to missile launch and guidance. This systemic understanding enabled the development of specific countermeasures and tactics designed to break that chain at every vulnerable link. Arguably the single most strategically significant intelligence Adolf Tolkachev ever provided was not about the Soviet systems currently entering service, but about those planned for the future. On several occasions, he delivered copies of Phasotron's highly classified internal 5-year research and development plans. These documents provided the Pentagon with an unprecedented, highly detailed look ahead, essentially a roadmap into the future trajectory of Soviet military avionics.
The sustained success of the Tolkachev operation, codenamed CKS Sphere, for over 6 years depended not only on the agent's extraordinary access and motivation, but also on a sophisticated, carefully managed fusion of cutting-edge CIA technology and the agent's own remarkable ingenuity and discipline. Operating in the hyper-surveilled world of Cold War Moscow demanded obsessive attention to every detail. To facilitate the transfer of literally thousands of pages of top-secret documents, the CIA's Office of Technical Service, or OTS, the agency's legendary workshop of spy gadgets, provided Tolkachev with some of its most advanced clandestine photographic and communication equipment, representing the state-of-the-art in miniaturization and covert technology for the era. Central to the operation's data exfiltration was the Tropel T-50 camera system and its subsequent iterations like the T-100. This device was a marvel of sub-miniature optical engineering, far smaller and more easily concealable than any commercially available camera. Designed specifically for high-resolution document photography under adverse conditions, the T-50 could be cleverly concealed inside seemingly innocuous everyday objects, a fountain pen, a specially modified keychain fob, or even a cigarette lighter. Its sophisticated lens assembly, consisting of multiple precisely ground glass elements, was capable of capturing exceptionally clear,
sharp, distortion-free images of dense text and complex diagrams onto small strips of specialized high-resolution microfilm. For secure communication between Tolkachev and his handlers, the CIA relied on methods designed to defeat the KGB's pervasive electronic surveillance capabilities. While traditional dead drops, utilizing prearranged concealed containers like fake rocks, specially modified bolts, or even simulated dead rats left in discrete public locations, were undoubtedly part of the operational tradecraft for exchanging film canisters and instructions. Maintaining secure two-way communication for operational planning and confirmation was paramount. This was primarily achieved using two key techniques: one-time pads for generating messages with theoretically unbreakable encryption, and specialized devices for short-range agent communications, or SRAC. The SRAC device, likely a model such as the CDS-501, was a miniature battery-powered burst transmitter. The agent or handler could pre-type a short encrypted message into the device's memory. Then, getting within a relatively short distance, typically a few hundred meters, of a designated listening post, often a receiver secretly embedded within the heavily shielded U.S. Embassy compound, they could transmit the entire message in a highly compressed, rapid burst lasting only a few seconds, sometimes even fractions of a second. The extremely short duration, low power, and often unpredictable timing of these signals made it nearly impossible for the KGB's extensive network of radio direction finding, or RDF teams, to reliably intercept the content or accurately triangulate the transmitter's precise location before the signal vanished. This provided a relatively secure, albeit limited channel for passing critical operational instructions, acknowledgments, or emergency signals. Adolf Tolkachev, however, proved to be far more than just a passive recipient and user of CIA technology. He was an active, innovative, and highly effective participant in his own espionage, applying his meticulous engineer's mind to the practical problems of stealing state secrets. He approached the security protocols at the Positron Institute not as insurmountable barriers, but as a complex system to be analyzed, understood, and ultimately defeated through careful observation and exploitation of inherent weaknesses. He reportedly found the CIA's sophisticated sub-miniature tropal cameras to be finicky, difficult to operate under pressure, and sometimes unreliable. Displaying remarkable pragmatism, he often preferred the robust simplicity and superior image quality of his own commercial Pentax 35mm camera. In a stroke of practical low-tech genius that belied the high-tech nature of the secrets he was stealing, he constructed a simple but effective copy stand in his Moscow apartment by physically clamping the Pentax camera to a sturdy chair. This created a stable, repeatable platform, allowing him to rapidly photograph large stacks of documents laid flat on the floor with consistent focus and clarity, often during his brief official lunch break when he was permitted to leave the institute. His process for acquiring the documents was a masterclass in exploiting bureaucratic loopholes, institutional complacency, and the sheer volume of classified material circulating within a large Soviet R&D facility. He discovered methods to check out top-secret documents from the Positron's Central Technical Library or specific project archives without leaving a proper, easily traceable record, often simply signing them out under vague pretenses and carrying them home concealed within his bulky overcoat or briefcase. When security procedures were eventually tightened, making removal of documents from the building prohibitively risky, Tolkachev adapted his methods. He meticulously identified secure private locations within the sprawling Positron complex itself, such as remote, seldom-used bathrooms, vacant offices during off hours, or secluded corners of laboratories. Where he had reliable access to better lighting
and could photograph documents without significant risk of being observed or interrupted. His output was prodigious, reflecting his dedication and efficiency. Records indicate that in one clandestine meeting alone, Tolkachev delivered almost 200 rolls of exposed film and over 150 rolls in another, each frame containing potentially priceless technical data, collectively forming pieces of the billion-dollar puzzle. He was not just a spy providing occasional reports. He was, in effect, a human engineer who had designed and ruthlessly implemented a highly efficient clandestine production line for the systematic exfiltration of state secrets on an industrial scale. The critical human link connecting Tolkachev's risky document acquisition to the intelligence analysts back in Washington was the dedicated team of CIA case officers operating under diplomatic cover at the Moscow station. After Tolkachev's determined efforts to establish contact were finally recognized and validated, the crucial, nerve-wracking task of conducting the first face-to-face meetings fell to John Gilsher, a skilled case officer fluent in Russian. He conducted the initial series of clandestine meetings, painstakingly building the essential foundation of trust, rapport, and operational security protocols that would sustain this extraordinarily sensitive relationship for years to come. He was the CIA's man on the ground, personally managing immense risk with every encounter, responsible for executing the meticulously planned, often hours-long surveillance detection runs, or SDRs, complex, seemingly random routes taken by car and on foot through the labyrinthian streets of Moscow, designed to identify and shake off the ubiquitous KGB surveillance teams before every single clandestine meeting with Tolkachev. Overseeing this entire high-stakes, high-reward operation from within the embassy walls were the successive Moscow station chiefs, including the experienced Burton Gerber during the crucial early 1980s period. The station chief served as the field commander on the absolute front lines of the intelligence war, constantly weighing the immense, undeniable value of the intelligence pouring in against the ever-present, potentially lethal risk to the asset, Tolkachev, and indeed to his own officers who met him. Every operational decision, from approving the timing and location of a meeting, to providing a new piece of specialized equipment, to fulfilling Tolkachev's grim request for a cyanide L pill for use in case of imminent capture, represented a calculated gamble made under the unblinking, hostile eye of the KGB. The successful management of the CK Espionage operation for over 6 years in arguably the most challenging, tightly controlled operational environment imaginable stands as a significant testament to the professionalism, courage, and tradecraft mastery of these dedicated CIA officers.
The intelligence provided by Adolf Tolkachev, CKSPH, was not merely interesting or tactically useful, it was fundamentally transformative. It provided a quantifiable, decisive, and enduring strategic advantage to the United States in the critical technological arms race in military avionics. This advantage paid tangible dividends across multiple domains, in strategic military planning, in massive economic efficiencies achieved through avoided R&D costs, and ultimately in ensuring battlefield air dominance for a generation. The most direct and perhaps most stunning measure of Tolkachev's immense value came from internal assessments conducted by the U.S. Air Force itself. By mid-1980, just 2 years into his remarkable 6-year run of espionage activity, Air Force intelligence analysts formally estimated that the technical data he had already provided had saved the U.S. vast sums in research and years of development. This staggering impact earned Tolkachev his evocative moniker, the billion-dollar spy. This calculation was derived primarily from the ability to cancel or drastically reorient expensive American weapons programs, particularly in electronic warfare and radar development, that were being designed under incorrect assumptions to counter a misunderstood or significantly misidentified Soviet technological threat. As one internal report highlighted, a single early delivery of documents related to a specific Soviet radar development pathway was credited with saving 5 full years of projected R&D time and associated costs in a critical American avionics countermeasures program. The value flowing from CKSPH was considered so profound, so impactful across the board, that senior CIA officials, including Director William Casey, reportedly used the Tolkachev operation in classified briefings to Congress as the prime example justifying the agency's substantial operational budget. This was not just a successful intelligence operation, it was perceived as an economic coup, effectively redirecting vast sums of taxpayer dollars away from potentially wasteful or misdirected projects and towards targeted, highly effective technological solutions based on accurate knowledge of the adversary's real capabilities and limitations. Before Tolkachev's detailed revelations, American electronic warfare (EW) doctrine often relied heavily on brute force jamming techniques. This involved developing and deploying powerful electronic countermeasures pods on aircraft that would essentially shout across the electromagnetic spectrum, attempting to blanket a wide range of potential enemy radar frequencies with high-energy electronic noise, hoping to overwhelm or saturate the enemy's sensors through sheer power. This approach, while sometimes effective, required immense electrical power, generated significant heat, made the jamming aircraft itself a prominent target, and was often inefficient against sophisticated radars capable of frequency hopping or using advanced signal processing. Tolkachev's intelligence fundamentally changed everything. By providing the literal blueprints, the precise operating frequencies, the signal modulation patterns, the pulse repetition intervals, and critically, the underlying signal processing logic of the next generation of Soviet fighter radars, he gave U.S. engineers the keys to the electronic kingdom. This intimate knowledge enabled a paradigm shift in Western electronic warfare philosophy, moving decisively from brute force barrage jamming towards highly targeted, surgical, or smart jamming. U.S. electronic warfare systems, such as those integrated into the Navy's EA-6B Prowler, the Air Force's F-4G Wild Weasel defense suppression aircraft, and the self-protection pods carried by tactical fighters, could now be meticulously programmed to exploit the specific, known vulnerabilities inherent in the design of each individual Soviet radar Tolkachev had exposed. Instead of attempting to overwhelm the entire spectrum, U.S. ECM systems could now whisper a precisely crafted, deceptive signal, perhaps a false target echo or a signal mimicking ground clutter, directly into the known processing blind spots or frequency gaps of the enemy's receiver logic. This capability effectively leapfrogged U.S. ECM technology past its Soviet counterparts, created an invisible, decisive electronic advantage that allowed U.S. aircraft to effectively blind, confuse, track, and defeat Soviet air defenses and interceptors with unprecedented efficiency, securing an electronic dominance that would become a defining characteristic of American air superiority for the next 2 decades and beyond. The impact of Tolkachev's data was felt directly and immediately on the production lines and in the software development labs of America's premier frontline fighter programs, the F-15 Eagle and the F-16 Falcon. In one of the most frequently cited examples of his direct influence, the U.S. Air Force, upon urgently reviewing Tolkachev's initial deliveries detailing the true capabilities and limitations of the MiG-29's radar, made the drastic decision to completely scrap a planned $70 million upgrade package for the F-15's own electronic suite. They went back to the drawing board, redesigning the upgrade specifically to counter the actual capabilities and exploit the newly revealed vulnerabilities of the new generation of Soviet fighters rather than the inflated threats previously assumed. Tolkachev's data fed a continuous, iterative loop of upgrades and refinements for both the F-15 and F-16 throughout the 1980s. The detailed performance parameters, operational limitations like blind velocities, and specific ECCM techniques employed by the Soviet Sapphire MiG-29 and Mech Su-27 radars were meticulously programmed into the threat libraries of the American fighters' sophisticated AN/APG-63 F-15 and AN/APG-66 F-16 radar systems. This allowed for the rapid development and fielding of optimized software patches and targeted hardware modifications, precisely fine-tuning the American radars to better detect, track, and maintain lock on their primary adversaries under various electronic conditions. Similarly, the onboard electronic warfare suites, internal jammers, and radar warning receivers carried by these fighters were continuously updated with software designed to recognize and exploit the specific electronic signatures and vulnerabilities Tolkachev had exposed. His purloined blueprints were not just objects of study in a remote laboratory. They were actively used as an engineering guide by American defense contractors and Air Force programmers to sharpen the electronic talons of the Eagle and the Falcon, ensuring their combat edge. The ultimate brutal validation of the Tolkachev operation's strategic impact came not in a classified budget meeting or a simulated war game, but in the harsh reality of combat, the skies over Iraq during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. The Iraqi Air Force, prior to the conflict, was considered one of the largest and best equipped in the developing world, flying a significant number of advanced Soviet-built aircraft, including the relatively modern MiG-29 Falcon. These aircraft were equipped with export versions of the same generation of Soviet avionics, radars, IFF systems, and missiles that Tolkachev had so thoroughly compromised a decade earlier. The result was one of the most lopsided aerial campaigns in modern military history. U.S. Air Force F-15Cs, their pilots rigorously trained, and their systems exquisitely tuned with a near-perfect Tolkachev-derived understanding of their enemy's capabilities and, crucially, weaknesses, achieved total air dominance almost immediately. Coalition pilots consistently achieved a first look, first shot, first kill advantage, detecting and engaging Iraqi fighters with long-range radar-guided missiles often before the Iraqi pilots even knew they were under attack. Iraqi attempts at electronic countermeasures proved ineffective against American systems designed specifically to defeat them based on Tolkachev's intelligence. The resulting air-to-air kill ratio was overwhelmingly, devastatingly in favor of coalition forces. This decisive battlefield dominance was the tangible, lethal dividend of Adolf Tolkachev's solitary espionage. The vast sums saved in R&D and the invaluable technological lead gained were translated directly into saved coalition lives and a swift, decisive military victory, validating the immense strategic value of his betrayal.
For 6 remarkable, high-tension years, Adolf Tolkachev and his dedicated CIA handlers operated successfully, almost miraculously, under the very nose of the pervasive KGB surveillance apparatus in Moscow. However, in 1985, a year that would become infamous in U.S. intelligence history as the Year of the Spy, his identity was ultimately compromised through overlapping betrayals by Edward Lee Howard and Aldrich Ames, bringing the entire, invaluable CK Sphere operation crashing down. The first critical crack in the operation's security came indirectly from Edward Lee Howard, a disgruntled former CIA trainee. Howard had been meticulously trained for a coveted, sensitive assignment to the CIA's Moscow station. As part of his intensive pre-deployment preparation,
He had been briefed, under strict secrecy oaths, on the existence and handling protocols for several of the agency's most critical operations within the Soviet Union, including the management of a prize high-level asset in the defense sector, K-sphere. Howard learned details about the specific tradecraft techniques used to communicate with and meet this source. However, just before his scheduled deployment to Moscow in 1983, Howard failed a routine polygraph examination, revealing unresolved issues concerning past drug use and petty theft. Based on these security concerns, the CIA abruptly fired him, shattering his career aspirations. Bitter, resentful, and possessing dangerous knowledge, Howard sought revenge. In 1984, he made contact with the KGB during a trip to Vienna, Austria, and began to sell what he knew about CIA operations and personnel in Moscow. While Howard did not know Tolkachev's true name or specific affiliation, he knew something almost as valuable: the operational tradecraft. He was able to describe in detail the specific methods, the types of locations used for meetings, parks, specific streets, underpasses, the complex timing sequences, the use of signal sites, and the pattern of surveillance detection runs, SDRs, the CIA employed to meet its key source in Moscow. This information was a gift to the KGB's Vigilant Second Chief Directorate, responsible for counterintelligence. It allowed them to move beyond general suspicion and begin sifting through thousands of potential suspects within the Soviet system. They could now focus their immense human and technical surveillance resources, observation posts, vehicle trackers, hidden microphones, phone taps, on a much more narrow, more specific profile, a high-level official working within the defense industrial sector, whose physical movements, work schedule, and patterns of behavior potentially matched the unique operational template Howard had described. Edward Lee Howard's betrayal did not directly name Adolf Tolkachev, but it fatally narrowed the search and effectively drew a target on his back. The KGB now knew how the CIA was meeting its prize asset. They just needed to confirm who. The final, fatal blow was delivered swiftly and brutally by Aldrich Ames, a veteran CIA counterintelligence officer working within the agency's Soviet East European Division, the very division responsible for running operations against the USSR. Motivated primarily by a desperate need for money to fund a lavish lifestyle far beyond his government salary, and to resolve financial difficulties stemming from a difficult divorce, Ames made a catastrophic decision. In April 1985, he walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., and offered to sell the CIA's most guarded secrets, including the identities of the Soviets spying for the CIA. On June 13, 1985, Ames delivered a package of highly classified documents to his KGB handlers. This package effectively identified, by name or providing uniquely identifying details, virtually every significant Soviet citizen who was secretly working for the CIA at that time. Among the names on that devastating list was Adolf Tolkachev, K-sphere. Ames' information was direct, definitive, and absolutely devastating. It instantly confirmed any lingering suspicions the KGB might have had based on Howard's earlier intelligence, and pointed them unequivocally, irrefutably, directly to their man inside Fazutron. Within weeks and months of Ames' betrayal, the CIA's entire network of human assets within the Soviet Union was systematically rolled up by the KGB. Subsequent investigations concluded that at least 10 of these valuable sources were executed as a direct result of Ames's treason. Many others received long prison sentences. If Howard's betrayal had put the KGB firmly on the scent, Aldrich Ames's treachery callously signed Adolf Tolkachev's death warrant. With Tolkachev's identity confirmed by Ames, the KGB moved swiftly and decisively. On the very same day that Ames delivered his fateful package in Washington, June 13, 1985, a KGB operational team was dispatched to intercept Tolkachev. As he was driving back towards Moscow from his dacha, country house, his car was stopped at a seemingly routine militia roadblock. The arrest was reportedly carried out by members of the KGB's elite Alpha Group Spetsnaz unit, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Zaitsev, indicating the extreme importance the KGB placed on capturing Tolkachev alive and preventing his escape or suicide. The operation was brutally efficient. Tolkachev was seized from his vehicle, subdued and strip-searched so quickly and forcibly that he had no opportunity to reach for or employ the cyanide L pill, L for lethal, the CIA had provided him precisely for such a contingency, a grim acknowledgement of the mortal risks he faced. Following the arrest, the KGB engaged in one final cynical act of deception against the CIA. They kept Tolkachev's capture a closely guarded secret for almost 10 months. During this period, they attempted to play back the compromised asset against the CIA, potentially forcing Tolkachev, under duress, to transmit false or misleading information through the established clandestine communication channels, hoping to manipulate U.S. intelligence assessments. However, the experienced officers at the CIA's Moscow station quickly detected subtle anomalies in the communication pattern, timing, or content. These operational red flags, combined with the sudden, catastrophic, and near-simultaneous loss of contact with virtually all of their other recruited Soviet assets across various agencies, also betrayed by Ames, led the CIA to the grim but unavoidable conclusion by late 1985 or early 1986, CK-Sphere had been definitively compromised. The most valuable, most productive human intelligence operation of the entire Cold War was over.
The capture of Adolf Tolkachev sent profound shockwaves rippling through the intelligence and defense establishments of both superpowers. For the Soviet Union, it marked the beginning of a frantic, expensive, and ultimately demoralizing damage assessment and technological recovery effort. For the CIA, it was the tragic, deeply felt end of a legendary espionage operation and the loss of an extraordinarily brave asset. For Tolkachev himself, capture by the KGB meant a predetermined, grim fate. The realization that a trusted chief designer at their premier military avionics institute, Positron, had been a highly productive CIA spy for 6 crucial years, induced a state of near panic within the institute itself, the Soviet Ministry of Defense, and the highest levels of the Communist Party. The damage was almost incomprehensible. An entire generation of their most advanced avionics, the sophisticated electronic heart and brains of their new fleet of MiG-29, MiG-31, and Su-27 fighters, aircraft designed to counter NATO's best, was completely and irrevocably compromised, potentially before these aircraft had even been widely deployed in operational units. Every crucial radar parameter, every painstakingly developed ECCM technique, every IFF protocol, every detail of missile integration was now known, catalogued, and analyzed by the adversary. This unprecedented technological exposure forced the Soviet Union into a series of ruinously expensive crash programs to hastily redesign, replace, or significantly modify the compromised electronic systems across multiple aircraft platforms. Radars had to be fundamentally re-engineered with new waveforms and processing logic, complex software rewritten and revalidated, entire weapons integration architectures potentially revisited. This unforeseen massive expenditure, likely amounting to a ruinous cost in rubles over several years,
placed an immense additional strain on the already struggling Soviet economy, which was beginning to buckle under the combined pressures of the relentless arms race, including Reagan's SDI initiative, internal stagnation, and the costly war in Afghanistan. One Sukhoi Design Bureau engineer reportedly lamented years later that it took his team over 20 years and thousands of individual modifications just to repair some of the damage Tolkachev had inflicted on the Su-27 program alone, highlighting the deep and lasting impact of the compromised avionics. In essence, Tolkachev's espionage, beyond its immediate intelligence value to the West, acted as a powerful and highly asymmetrical form of economic warfare. The CIA's relatively low-cost operation to recruit and run him for 6 years forced the USSR to spend a veritable fortune in a desperate, ultimately futile attempt to regain technological parity and security, significantly accelerating the economic decline that would contribute to its eventual collapse just a few years later. For Adolf Tolkachev, the personal end was swift and brutal, following the grim, predetermined script for captured traitors in the Soviet system. After months of intensive interrogation by the KGB, likely involving severe psychological and perhaps physical pressure, he was put on trial in secret for high treason. On September 24, 1986, he was convicted. The sentence was death. He was executed shortly thereafter, reportedly by a single gunshot to the back of the head, the standard KGB method. The following day, KGB chairman Viktor Chebrikov formally reported the execution to the ruling Politburo. Chebrikov stated flatly that Tolkachev handed over very important military technical secrets to the enemy and had been caught with 2 million rubles paid by American intelligence, a figure likely inflated for internal effect. His wife, Natalia, whose family history had been a key part of his motivation, was also arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison for her alleged complicity or failure to report his activities. Within the clandestine halls of the Central Intelligence Agency, Adolf Tolkachev is revered as a legend, the undisputed crown jewel of Cold War human intelligence operations, and arguably one of the most important and productive human assets in the agency's entire history. His contributions are often compared favorably to those of Colonel Oleg Penkovsky, the GRU officer whose intelligence proved critical during the Cuban Missile Crisis, with many senior intelligence officials considering Tolkachev's long-term strategic impact on the technological balance of power to be of even greater, more enduring value. His intelligence was demonstrably so impactful, saving vast sums in defense spending, that it was credited internally and reportedly in classified congressional briefings with single-handedly justifying the CIA's entire operational budget for multiple years. Today, in a rare tribute for a foreign agent, a portrait of Adolf Tolkachev hangs in a place of honor within the headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency in Langley, Virginia. It serves as a permanent, albeit classified, memorial to the man known to his handlers and grateful analysts as the billion-dollar spy. It stands also as a powerful, enduring testament to the immense, often irreplaceable value of human intelligence, even in an age increasingly dominated by sophisticated satellites and remote signals intelligence collection. Tolkachev's extraordinary story serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the most valuable, most inaccessible secrets, the adversary's detailed plans, their hidden designs, their true intentions, can only be obtained from a courageous, ideologically motivated individual on the inside. An engineer who, driven by deep personal conviction and a desire for revenge, decided to fundamentally change the course of the Cold War with stacks of classified blueprints and a simple 35mm camera.